Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Laura Ciceri.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. My name is Laura Ciceri. I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights, and this podcast is designed for the supply chain leader that's on the go but wants to stay in the know. Here I interview supply chain leaders, practitioners, and all with the goal of trying to help you improve your supply chain. Today I'm interviewing one of my favorite supply chain leaders, Shellie Molina. And I met Shellie I think a couple of jobs ago, and she's had multiple jobs. And I just wanted to check in with her to get some insights about what she's learning about leading supply chain teams. Shellie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Laura. I'm really happy to be here.
So, Shellie, I've known you, I think, now through 3 positions, and maybe you can just kind of take a step back and say, what did you learn as a supply chain leader, taking on a new role or moving to a new company, about how to drive supply chain excellence?
Oh, thank you, Laura. Over the last few years, I've been working in a private equity-owned B2B smaller company. Prior to that, I was at First Solar, larger company, and prior to that, I was in Honeywell Aerospace. And, being able to take the things that you've learned from a big supply chain like Honeywell, and then applying it to a First Solar supply chain, and then taking it to a smaller supply chain, it's really been interesting on the things that are exactly the same, and then the things that you have the ability to influence even more when it is a smaller company. In this last role, it was a really interesting position. I was the chief operating officer for, like I said, a smaller company. And it was a global company, had nodes in Australia, Italy. Most of the supply chain was either in China or in Indonesia. And I was the 5th COO in 6 years, which kind of was a challenge, going into it, knowing that was going to be a challenge, because if, the other 5, or the other 4 couldn't have figured it out, the pressure was certainly on from that perspective. And so some of the things that I think are really important is being able to kind of look at the supply chain end to end and the business in general. And being at the C-suite level for this particular role, it was so nice to be so close to what the business objectives were, which were really all about growth. And they were failing at the operational side of things, which was why they were having so much turnover in this particular role. And so it was a big challenge. And as I had mentioned to you, one of the things that was fantastic was being able to not only use the experience I had, practitioner-wise, but being able to utilize the tools that your team offers on the website. Being able to use the journals, some of them, may seem dated if people look at them, but I'm telling you, they are exactly what was needed. And as I was hiring new people, it was great to be able to say, read this and help with the training from that perspective, because they really had no concept of planning. A funny story was I asked somebody my first, 30 days, who's responsible for the forecast? And their response was Joe. And I said, Joe, the IT guy? Yeah, Joe manages the forecast. So that was kind of how challenged this particular organization was. So after, setting up a really solid strategy deployment session and really getting everybody aligned on where we were going, first order of magnitude was definitely implementing a sales and operations planning system. And so being able to utilize the tools on the website, the blogs, everything from the supply chains to admire in terms of being able to know what metrics we should be looking at. It was just fantastic. It was it was like a textbook of here are all the things that that you need to do. So I'm really grateful for everything that your team does.
Well, what really spoke to you? What piece of research or model really helped you the most? And can you share a story?
I can. So I think probably the one that was most helpful was in the journal, the one on a focused look at S&OP, and the other journal on a focused look on demand. Both of those were hugely impactful on how I set up the planning system. So, for example, because this particular industry that I was in, it wasn't something that was in a high tech, so you weren't changing, things weren't changing every week. So we were able to set up a really solid monthly planning cycle to be able to have your demand reviews in your first week, your supply reviews second week, etc. And so just introducing that particular rhythm of how do you have a planning rhythm to the team was huge. But I'd say probably one of the most important things was really the metrics and being able to utilize, the supply chains to admire. And we had done some of that work together at First Solar on putting some of the orbital charts together. Really explaining to people how important it was to look at what metrics we were doing that impacted the business. They were measuring some things, but not things that really mattered to the business. So we were looking at what was our inventory turns to our revenue growth, but also important, which was what was our on-time delivery as compared to our inventory, and seeing how those two things were growing. And so one of the things that I think was really important is after we implemented our first round of S&OP, and more importantly, being able to understand that we needed a planning tool and a solution. And so being able to use, the research that you had on, what do you really need to do? I had lots of people trying to sell me lots of things. And, Laura, we just went old school. The company actually already had a license for an old version of demand solutions. So we owned it. So it was free. And they just weren't using it. They had changed ERP systems. So when we when they had changed to their new ERP system, they kind of threw away the old planning tool. Well, we were able to just bring that back, and within 6 months, we improved delivery performance by 25%, inventory turns improved by another turn, and it was really pretty. I look back on it and say, well, it was pretty simple, but apparently the other folks weren't able to quite get it there, and that was a really big win for the supply chain organization as a whole.
Love the stories, and so glad the research helped. If you had one piece of advice for supply chain leaders listening to this podcast, what would it be?
Oh, one piece of advice. Don't overlook plan, do, check, act, or adjust. I think that the basics are the building blocks, and I think that being able to start with having a plan, being able to, do something about it, measuring it, and then adjusting is it's a really simple concept. It doesn't have to be that complicated. And then I would say my second piece, although it's only one, but my second piece would be, don't be afraid to reach out to your research or to you. You've been a great help to me in my career.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Now, if you had one piece of advice for a young female in supply chain listening to this, what would that be?
One piece of advice for a young female: you're stronger than you think.
And what does that mean?
And go after.
How would you apply that?
After what you want. Set your sights higher than you think. I think growing up in supply chain, I always set my bar, I think, a little low. And I think that I'm a bit of a late bloomer. And I think that, my advice to my younger self would definitely be, you're better than you think you are, and don't be afraid to go for it. You're smart, you've got it, just work hard. One of my mentors used to always just say, show up. Half the battle is showing up and being present and being a part of the team. And don't be afraid to speak up. Don't ever be afraid to speak up.
I was speaking at WORMS, which is a Women in Operations Research Conference, and one of the gals in the audience said, my piece of advice would be pull up the chair to the table. Don't sit on the back row. I thought that was really appropriate, because that's about having the confidence to speak up, get involved, and, kind of sit at the table, and having the courage to do that. Well, Shellie, over your career, supply chain's changed a lot. Let's look back. How has it changed for people that, maybe see it as it is today? And what's changed and what hasn't changed?
What's funny to me that what hasn't changed is that when I tell people I'm in supply chain, I still get, what's that? Which kind of makes me, so I think that's kind of funny when people say they don't know what supply chain is. So I think that hasn't changed. I think there's still a lot of conversation around that. I think at the same time, if you're actually in business, I think that what's changed, as I've seen it, is supply chain is getting a stronger seat at the table, at least in the organizations that I've been a part of. And I think that as a profession, I think that it's getting a lot more support from other areas of the business.
Well, Shellie, thanks for joining the show today. It's great to see your continued progress, and I look forward to your next position. And, as always, we appreciate your wisdom. Thanks until next time.
Thanks, Laura. Have a great day.
You too. Bye now.